So now, David, after your construction site survey, if it is determined that there's additional work required or there's a circuit relocation required, how do you go about managing that part of the estimating or bidding? Now, as far as the day of install, tell us about the crew that installed this. How was the crew organized? How many people? Any special equipment or training that they were provided? And kind of just walk us through that process, please. Okay, so we're looking inside the A-gate. Now, David, can you kind of walk us through how do you have the A-gate configured to take advantage of the smart control for the electric vehicle and the non-critical loads? Hi everyone, Joe Ordia here for Solar Surge, and today we're coming to you from Los Altos, California, where we're looking at a live solar and storage installation. And this morning I'm joined by David Inda, CEO and founder of Indaspec, whose company actually installed the system that we're going to be looking at today. So David, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
All right. So so this whole series that we're working on now, the overall theme here is talking to contractors that are installing solar and storage and that are actually able to do it profitably, despite the fact that solar and storage installations include a lot more complexity than when you're talking about just a solar-only grid tie system. And so our goal here is to deliver maximum value to you, particularly you electrical contractors that are watching this, that maybe you're new to installing battery storage, or you're still figuring out how you can do solar with batteries as profitably as you're able to do solar by itself, to make sure that we're sharing those knowledge and experience and best practices. So David, tell us about the basic specs of the system that we're looking at today. How much PV and how much battery capacity?
Yeah, so this customer has 14 kilowatts of PV and 54 kilowatts of storage. And this is a mostly whole home backup scenario. So we have a 400 amp service, but 200 amps of the site is backed up.
Excellent, excellent. And with that solar and battery capacity, are they able to achieve 100% of their energy usage, or is it a partial offset system? What was the goal with designing this system?
So the goal was twofold. The goal was to provide 100% energy offset, which is achieved with the 14 kilowatts of solar, but also provide extended outage support when the power is out. And so with this current system, there's actually been a few outages that we've been able to record, and they've been 3 or 4 days without any power and being able to have most of the comforts of home still energized.
Excellent. Okay. Now, I know that when we talk about doing solar, especially solar with mostly home battery backup, the planning process is a little bit different than if you're just looking at a vanilla solar project. So kind of walk us through your process from designing the system during the sales process to the survey process. How do things go on this particular install?
Yeah, so for this install, this was considered a spec home. So it was a brand new build. So the assumption was that the site wasn't set up for us. So when we show up after construction was completed, we needed to ensure that, what was separated on the two 200 amp panels was enough for us to be able to separate the system. And so we have a backup system and a non-backup system. And so part of the assessment process for us was to really communicate with the customer what their primary goals were, which in this case, saving money and long-term backup, and then ensure that we'd be able to execute on site. So the sales site visit was identifying the type of electrical panel, what circuits were on the backup side of the panel or the ideal backup side of the panel, and making sure that we can execute the installation. The other item here is, because we know a lot of these new homes tend to have a lot of windows, a lot of natural light that's allowed to come in, we don't have a lot of usable wall space. And so one of the major considerations here with this design was, where are we going to put the batteries? How can we meet local fire and building codes to be able to execute the amount of storage required for this property?
Excellent, excellent. So we got two 200 amp panels here, and I know this is common for larger homes. You have two separate 200 amp panels. Now our whole house backup gateway is designed to energize a 200 amp, right? A single of those 200 amps. So did you have to reposition circuits between the panels?
Yes,
to balance that out?
So oftentimes when you're dealing with what's known as a split 400, you have two 200 amp services. Generally, you'll have a sub panel or main panel inside of the house that's fed by one of the 200 amp branch circuits. That would generally have most of your circuits. But things like landscape lighting, internet, sub-equipment that provides internet to the property, gate operation or garage operation, oftentimes are on the other side of the 200 or 400 amp service. And so generally we like to not back up heavy use items like EV chargers, AC condensers, high-use appliances like dryers, electric water heaters, when we're thinking about critical load infrastructure. So we have to play musical breakers, in a sense, to ensure that the right breakers end up on the backup panel. Oftentimes with backup panels, since they're located inside the house and our combination 400 amp meter mains are in the exterior where the gateways tend to reside, we need to find another place to land those additional circuits that are coming from the main panel. And with Franklin, we've had the flexibility to do so via their multiple backup inputs for the lug inputs for multiple backups, and via their smart load features, which is what we utilize in this project.
Excellent. Well, let's talk more about that, because I know that's one of the things, especially for you who've been following the channel for a while. One of the components that typically makes up a successful whole home backup implementation is some sort of intelligent load control. So if you're running on emergency backup power, you're not necessarily trying to run every single item in the house. There are certain high draw but low priority items that could potentially draw the batteries faster than you want, but are really not critical in an emergency. So I'm thinking things like EV charger, clothes dryer, to some extent maybe electric water heater or electric oven. These are high draw items, so you don't necessarily need them in an emergency situation. So I'd like to take a look at how you implemented load control on this particular application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it goes twofold. So yes, smart load control is great for load shedding to drop circuits when they're not required, especially non-critical items like the ones you mentioned. But it also serves on the opposite side of being able to utilize maximum solar potential when you don't need to recharge your batteries. So in an off-grid situation, if your batteries are fully charged and the load in the house isn't great enough to provide power, the demand in the house isn't great enough to draw the power from the solar, the Franklin system is designed to curtail solar production to ensure you don't overcharge the batteries. The challenge is if it's the middle of the day, it's a beautiful sunny day, you have fully charged batteries, and you want to run the air conditioning, that is the ideal time to pre-charge the house, run your dryer, potentially dump some power into your EV charger. So having the load shifting to be able to utilize power that's available is equally as effective as being able to drop a circuit when you're not, when your battery storage, your solar availability is a lot lower. So it does benefit on both sides.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because the context here, we're in Northern California here, just outside of San Jose. We're in net metering 3, right? Which means that like right now, there's abundant solar coming in. We don't necessarily want to send that solar back to PG&E because they're not going to give us full credit for it anymore. So I'd rather charge it into the electric vehicle. And I noticed actually the electric vehicle was plugged in out front when we came up. So you're able to utilize the smart circuit control to say, hey, we've got extra solar right now. Let's put it in the EV as opposed to sell it to PG&E and take a loss. Is that right?
Essentially, yes. And primarily in the off-grid capacity. So on-grid, the system is designed to optimize the flow of energy as an energy management system to ensure that it's going to the loads in the house. EV chargers, electric water heaters run during the day to avoid peak price charges. But in the off-grid scenario, that's really where you can leverage the functionality and the technology to make sure that you can also dump that additional solar energy into items that wouldn't regularly be backed up. And that is achieved with the smart load feature.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we're looking inside the A-gate. Now, David, can you kind of walk us through how do you have the A-gate configured to take advantage of the smart control for the electric vehicle and the non-critical loads?
Yeah, so in this case, because we have a relatively large PV system connected to this battery storage to account for when the 400 amp service is available, we're going to have excess PV generation when they're in off-grid mode. And so being able to utilize the two smart circuits, both the EV and essentially the heat pump combiner panel, allows the homeowner to be able to use that excess solar energy that's no longer required by the batteries for recharging to be able to charge the EV in the event of an outage. You would still be able to utilize that, or be able to pre-cool or heat the home when he's on battery power, especially during the day. As you mentioned, in California, we have 300 plus days a year of sun. Even in rainy environments or typical off-grid scenarios, there's still going to be plenty of solar available to charge the batteries and then also provide some of the support for the smart load feature circuits.
Great, great. All right, so David, I know there was a number of complexities that you had to manage on this particular project as well. Namely, you have the batteries on one side of the house, you've got the switchgear, the meter service here on an opposite corner of the house, and really no crawl space to work with. So how did you go about tackling this particular project, and what was the process prior to even the install crew arriving to make sure that they were able to do this project on schedule, on budget?
Yeah, so I think it's very important that when your sales site assessor or your technical site assessor, in this case a construction manager, visits the site, that they understand that the codes and the requirements by the jurisdictions that having authority, and, are requiring for battery mounting, battery locations relative to windows, relative to other equipment. And so when we did the construction site assessment, we determined right away that there was a large gas meter next to the switchgear, which limited battery placement. The house is very nicely laid out with the landscape in the yards, and so the homeowner was very conscious of the aesthetics of the design and the installation. So then we determined, okay, then the batteries had to be on the opposite side of the house. How would we execute that wire run back to the A gate? And so we have our solar designers on site. They can conduct a quick assessment and determine if we're running pipe for the solar circuits back to the A gate, then we can run similar pipe on the roof to come back to the main panel and to the A gate itself. And when you're making that assessment, there's a cost factor to be taken into account. When you put pipes on roof, there's temperature derate correction factors. There's other factors that will require you to run bigger pipe, to run bigger wire, and to provide spacing off the roof surface. That is all going to add complexity and cost to the project. So if the person that's on site doing the assessment is not aware of these design scenarios, you can lose a lot of money or require large change orders if you're not accounting for that when you're submitting your final proposal.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So how did you manage all that on this particular project?
So initially we did the site visit for the sales purposes. When we determined where the battery locations were going to have to be, then the salesman had a conversation with our construction manager and our electrician to say, before we submit a final proposal, what are the technical constraints here that we need to keep in account for costing? And that's when it was determined that we had to come up and over the house, over the roof. And so in doing so, we were able to propose the site, in doing so, we were able to propose the cost of the project that reflected the actual scope of work.
Okay, and so you knew that right up front, pretty much right after the initial sale, whatever adjustments might have to be made before you get into the permitting process. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, great, great. Now, as far as the day of install, tell us about the crew that installed this. How was the crew organized? How many people? Any special equipment or training that they were provided? And kind of just walk us through that process, please.
Yeah, so since this project was solar and storage, we had two distinct groups that were, actually technically three distinct groups that were on site. We had our battery technicians and electricians, we had our roofing crew, and then we had our solar crew. And so we like to differentiate the skill sets to make sure that the people who are trained to do the various skills on the job are the ones that are focused on doing that work. So we don't have electricians doing solar mounts, we don't have solar technicians doing battery mounting, and we don't have roofers running electrical. And this way you ensure that the proper training is provided to the appropriate technician to execute that work, and then you're not going to have any issues down the line. And so in this case, we had the roofing crew arrive first to do the TPO mounts, which is a vinyl roofing system. And so that is a very specialty skill that's required. So we only have a certain amount of our roofing crew that's capable of doing those mounts. By installing the mounts ahead of time per the solar layout, it allowed our solar crew to come on site, build the racking, drop the panels, and do so relatively quickly. In conjunction with the solar installation, we had the electrical crew already starting to hang the equipment, and this is before we're tapping into the main, before we're cutting power to the house, starting to hang the equipment so we have the A to B location. So we get a real good sense of where the wire is going to go, how much wire we need. And then when we are ready to tap the main, all of the major lift was done so that we minimize the inconvenience to the homeowner of how long they're without power. So in this case, the way that the system was configured, the homeowner lost power no more than 2 hours.
Excellent, excellent. And in terms of the selection of equipment for this project, so I notice you're just looking at the components. We know we're using the Franklin whole home battery system as well as the Franklin A-gate to manage the different power flows. And it looks like we have, on the solar side, we've got N-phase microinverters on the roof. Is this a typical configuration for you?
Yes, it's typical configuration. One of the reasons that we really enjoy working with the Franklin solution is because being a solar agnostic battery solution, we're allowed to use various different types of solar systems depending on whether it's pre-existing solar or whether we're installing new solar. Uh, Indaspec Energy Solutions has been very adamant at reinforcing the redundancy model. And so using AC microinverters like Enphase allows us to ensure that we have maximum uptime on the solar side, and then having AC coupled battery solutions that have independent redundancy between the various batteries allows us a continued redundancy to make sure that we have maximum uptime. So this is a very common configuration for our new builds where we have AC microinverters on the roof connected to our Franklin battery solutions.
And I'm just curious, of the battery installations that you're involved with, what percentage would you say are retrofitting to add battery storage to existing solar versus just putting in new solar with storage, everything at the same time?
Well, because Indaspec Energy Solutions started as an O&M service and retrofit company, we've become very comfortable working with existing solar. And as a result, we've been able to build a niche as a contractor that can support existing solar systems and add battery storage as a retrofit. And so I would say that it's pretty simple to say that we're about 50% of existing solar adding batteries to new systems with new solar, new batteries.
And why do you choose the Franklin system when you're doing a retrofit for somebody that already has solar panels?
The main reason that we like to choose Franklin is, again, the redundancy, its ease of integration with existing solar systems, and the simplicity of design. It also allows us to add a lot of solar. So a lot of these homes have 30, 40, 50, 60 amps of pre-existing solar. And so with the Franklin system, we have a lot of headroom in that design because of the way that the A-gate is laid out and configured. So it gives us a lot of flexibility to be able to incorporate multiple solar systems into a single battery design. There are a number of solutions where we will add additional solar into the existing solar system and then connect that to the Franklin system. And because it's AC tie-in and essentially technology agnostic, it allows us to mix and match various different types of solar equipment and all land it on the A-gate.
So in other words, let's say this house already had an Enphase solar system before you showed up. You could just tap in right here. You wouldn't have to change anything on the roof.
That is correct.
Got it. So now, David, after your construction site survey, if it is determined that there's additional work required or there's a circuit relocation required, how do you go about managing that part of the estimating or bidding?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that one of the major differentiations between bidding solar and bidding batteries is that you can't just have only the sales team involved. You need to have your construction managers, your electricians, your foremen involved in the process. Because when we talk about access and the location of equipment, they need to know what they're looking at so that they can determine a time and material price structure, so that when you present the customer the final proposal, it's incorporating all of the adders that aren't just the standard, whether it's a steep roof or whether it's a tile versus a shingle. These are adders dependent upon actual time and material labor required to do the installation correctly, and then you can present it to the homeowner and have no surprises of change orders.
So really the whole idea of having like a simple per battery pricing model doesn't really work.
It's not ideal because you will almost definitely lose more than you win in that proposal. A one battery fits all price is either going to have to be so large that you're going to lose jobs, or it's going to be so underpriced that you're constantly dealing with change orders, or you're going to be forcing your team to move so quickly that the quality is going to suffer. And when you're dealing with critical infrastructure like electrical and batteries, that's the last place you want to cut corners.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that we touched on, I know, on some of our previous videos, is this idea that some of the compensation and incentive models that solar contractors use to kind of encourage their guys to move along quickly and get as many panels on the roof quickly so they can get to the next job. Mm-hmm. That's not really what you want when you're talking about a solar with storage installation, is it? Yes.
I think ultimately the responsibility for efficiency and speed lies in the organization and not in the individual. So where before we were pushing solar installers to move quickly because the understanding was that maybe they needed a little bit more incentive to run, here the efficiency comes from the planning process, the preparation of your teams, and appropriate training. If you train the teams properly to be able to identify what they're looking at, if you're doing the planning up front to ensure that you're covering your basis on costing and building budgets that are appropriate to this project scope, then you're not forcing your team to run quickly. You're not incentivizing to go quickly because you've determined a budget and time requirement that will be able to successfully execute that project, and the pricing will be reflected. In a single price per battery model, you'll never be able to account for all of those variations. And so this is why our approach, we felt to be more successful, is because we are not putting the onus of responsibility on the installers to be quick. We're putting the responsibility on the organization as a whole to ensure an efficient design and deployment.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, David, so that sounds like what I've been hearing from you before. You know, measure twice, cut once, make sure you have a solid plan. So when the crew gets here, they know what they're doing, they can execute the plan, they can get out on schedule, on budget, and really protect those margins for the organization.
And that is correct. That has been our success, and we look forward to continue to develop that at Indaspec.
Great. Well, folks, again, this is another video, part of this theme that we're doing, which is how to install batteries with solar and how to do that profitably for you contractors out there. As always, if you're getting good value from the content that we're publishing, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. That's just going to tell YouTube and the other platforms to just go ahead and show this video to more people. Also, go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. That way, as we have our new videos coming out, it'll come up on your homepage so that you can stay up to date with us. But that pretty much does it for today's video. I thank you for spending some more time with Solar Surge. And as always, I'm Joe Ordia here, encouraging you to get prepared and be empowered. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next program.